Today, we're going to talk about one of the most important civil rights decisions in American history, Loving versus Virginia. And really, it's a story about a simple desire for two people who loved each other to be able to live as a family in their own home. To really get a feel for the world Richard and Mildred Loving were up against, you just have to hear these words. This is from the Virginia judge who first sentenced them. This wasn't just some random opinion. This was a worldview actually written into law that they dared to challenge. Okay, so let's meet the people at the very heart of this case. You have Richard Loving, who was a white man, and Mildred, a woman of African American and Native American descent. But back then, the state of Virginia just classified her as colored. They grew up together, they fell in love, and, they just wanted to get married. Now, they knew getting married in Virginia was illegal for them, so they came up with what seemed like a pretty logical workaround. They just drove a short ways up to Washington, D.C., where their marriage was totally legal, and they tied the knot. You'd think that would be that, right? But no. That marriage license from D.C. meant absolutely nothing back home in Virginia. A few weeks later, the sheriff bursts into their bedroom in the middle of the night and arrests them. And their crime? It wasn't anything you'd expect. It was just being married to each other. So how is that even possible? How could a marriage be a felony? Well, it all came down to this one very specific and deeply prejudiced Virginia state law. It was called the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. And honestly, the name tells you everything you need to know about what it was for. This had nothing to do with public safety. It was all about enforcing racial segregation and holding up a system of white supremacy. And this just shows you the pure absurdity of their situation. I mean, think about it. In Washington, D.C., they were a legally married couple. But the second they crossed back over the state line into Virginia, they were criminals, felons. So the judge finds them guilty and sentences them to a year in prison. But then he offers them this deal. He'd suspend the sentence if they left Virginia and promised not to come back together for 25 years. They were literally exiled from their home, their families, everything they knew. So the Lovings took the deal. They had to. They moved to D.C. But being banished from the only home you've ever known, well, that wasn't the end of their story. It was actually the beginning of a long, hard fight to get back. And you've got to understand, this fight was not quick. This was a marathon, not a sprint. We're talking about nearly a decade, all the way from that shocking arrest in 1958 to the final Supreme Court ruling in 1967. After 5 years of being in exile, Mildred Loving had just had enough. She was frustrated, she was desperate to raise her kids back home in Virginia. So in 1963, she did something that would change everything. She sat down and wrote a letter to the U.S. Attorney General at the time, Robert F. Kennedy, just asking if there was anything he could do. And believe it or not, that one letter, it kicked off a whole chain of events. Kennedy referred her to the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. They took the case, and that began a legal battle that would climb all the way to the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court. So what was their big argument? At its core, it was really simple. Their lawyers argued that Virginia's law was unconstitutional. It completely violated the 14th Amendment, which is supposed to guarantee every citizen equal protection of the laws. And denying someone the right to marry just because of their race, well, that seemed like a pretty clear violation of that promise. But beyond all the complex legal talk, Richard Loving, who was a really quiet, private guy, he gave his lawyers a message for the justices. It was so simple and so powerful. It wasn't a legal argument. It was just a human plea that got right to the very heart of the whole thing. So, the big question was, how would the 9 justices of the Supreme Court respond? This wasn't just some abstract legal case. It was a deeply personal fight for the right to love and live at home. Their answer would create a legacy of equality that we're still feeling today. On June 12, 1967, the Supreme Court handed down its decision. And it wasn't even close. It wasn't a 5-4 split. It was unanimous. A 9-0 ruling in favor of Richard and Mildred Loving. The message was unmistakable. And the court didn't just strike the law down. They completely tore apart its reasoning. The Chief Justice wrote that these kinds of laws had no legitimate purpose and that their only goal was to maintain white supremacy. It was this incredibly direct and powerful rejection of that whole system. And by doing that, the court basically established a new rule for the entire country. It affirmed that the freedom to marry is one of the basic civil rights of man. It's a fundamental right that belongs to every single person, and the government just can't take it away because of someone's race. The impact was huge, and it was immediate. Just like that, every single state law that banned interracial marriage was gone, wiped off the books, totally unconstitutional. The Lovings were finally free to go home. And so were thousands of other couples all across the country. One family's very personal fight had just secured a universal right for everyone. You know, the story of Richard and Mildred Loving is so much more than a history lesson. It's this powerful reminder that sometimes our biggest legal fights don't start in a courtroom, but in the heart of a family that just wants to go home. The ideas cemented in this case, equality, the fundamental right to choose who you love, they've echoed for decades, paving the way for other civil rights battles. It really makes you think, how does this one couple's fight for their right to love continue to define and even expand what freedom means for all of us today?